So it is my pleasure now to introduce Nick Ross, our most distinguished guest speaker. Nick and his wife Sarah have been visiting Australia on something of a Tatura pilgrimage, and I am delighted that they accepted the invitation to be here today. Nick is a wonderful speaker and he's agreed to tell us something of his family's Tatura history. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you, Seamus. Thank you, Sue. Thank you to everyone. We should be thanking you, not you applauding us. We are so privileged to be here and so gobsmacked at this museum. I mean, it is absolutely wonderful. It's the sort of thing you might find in a significant city, not a small community like Tatura. And just going through and discovering how it began with irrigation and all the rest of it, clearly my father's story is a miniature part of that. And in telling that story, I can tell you, you're going to be profoundly disappointed because most of you know more than I do. My father never spoke about his time here. That was partly my fault, of course, and my brother and my sister, because young people get on with their own lives. It's only when you're older you begin to worry and wonder about what your parents went through. But there's another reason he never spoke about it, and that is I've discovered going through documents that we discovered after he had died, and that is shame. The humiliation of being a prisoner, of being an ordinary Joe, and then suddenly you're arrested, you're taken not knowing where you're going to go. In his case, unlike the Queen Mary people, at least they flew business class, as it were, but in his case, brutalized, put on what was, as you all know, called a floating concentration camp, where some of them were beaten up, most of them had their baggage stolen, they were crowded below into... Sorry, okay, not at all.
Trouble picking you up.
Oh, forgive me, I'll be a bit closer. I'm sorry for those at the back. Crowded below the hole, into the holds. Most of you know the Tatura story, I assume, so I'm not going to go on about that. And it was only really when my mother died that we discovered a treasure trove, an absolute treasure trove. And like other internees here, he had kept notes. But in his case, he had been, I think, a camp, a hut leader, but also was in charge of the camp post office. So he was in effect camp secretary and treasurer. So an enormous number of documents and files, some of them, I couldn't think why anybody would be interested at all documenting who got which and how much money came from England and how it was dispersed and all the rest of it. A whole bundle of stuff. We just didn't know what to do with it. We thought it had no value at all. We did discover things we did think had value, and oh, how stupid we were to get rid of them. Some included literally millions of Reichmark. This was in the days of massive hyperinflation in Germany when my father still lived there. And the extraordinary thing for those who haven't seen the Reichmark of the period is they go from being worth 100 to 1,000 to 10,000 to 100,000 to 1,000,000. And then the million Reichmarks, it depends on which week they were printed. Their value deteriorated as new ones were printed. And some of the last ones we had actually gave the hour they were printed. Such was hyperinflation. And when you see those notes, you get such a clear understanding of why in Germany there was this passion. We needed some strength, somebody who would get us out of it. What we also discovered is a lot of newspaper cuttings that he had kept before he left Berlin in 1933, and I'll tell you about some of these, but these were later ones, much later, that he had acquired. And these are German newspapers. This one's from the Frankfurter Zeitung, and this is in 1937, 4 years after Hitler became Chancellor. It is a hopeless misjudgment to think that one could force a dictatorial regime upon the German nation. The diversity of the German people will always call for democracy. Even the Central Jewish Organization greeted Hitler with the largest mistrust, but was, and I'm quoting, sure that nobody would dare to touch our constitutional rights. My grandmother, Annie, was not so sanguine. It was said, I don't know if it was true, she was the only one in the family who had actually read Mein Kampf. And the moment that Hitler was announced Chancellor, she sent my father to the railway station in Berlin, got tickets to London, and they left within 3 or 4 weeks. And they left everything. They closed up the flat. They had a little house in the countryside, closed it, abandoned the flat, abandoned most of their possessions, and just left. Many years later, we were contacted by a German lawyer saying, did your family own a flat in Klopstockstrasse in Berlin? And I said, yeah, but it was bombed by the RAF. It doesn't exist anymore. He said, yeah, but you should still be able to get reparations because your mother just left. Perhaps I should explain that my father had already left, my grandfather rather. My grandmother, an extraordinary woman, Annie Lesser, was engaged to a chap called Martin Rosenblut. Martin Rosenblut was a passionate Zionist. Mutti, my grandmother, Annie, wasn't. But nonetheless, she was strongly attracted to Martin. Having got engaged to Martin, she decided she liked his brother even more. And so she married Felix, who was also a passionate Zionist. And eventually, Felix became the Zionist representative in London to the League of Nations. So my father, as a child, aged, I think, what would he have been, 7 or 8, was brought to London, not speaking a word of English, where he met a girl who helped him learn English. Her name was Joy, would later my mother. And then they went back to Germany. And in 1926-27, my grandfather decided to emigrate to Palestine. My grandmother was not a Zionist. Why on earth she'd got engaged to 2 passionate Zionists, I will never understand, not wanting to go to Jerusalem herself. So she stayed behind. Some people put it she was rather abandoned, but I think it was very much her choice. She didn't want to go, and he was possibly more married to Zionism than he was to anything else. He later became the first Minister of Justice in Israel. He commissioned and helped to write the Constitution of Israel. He would be rolling in his grave as a liberal, looking at the attempts to undermine that constitution now and many of the other things that have happened in Israel. If you think of the period of the 1940s, you had the Stern Gang on one hand. My grandfather would have been at the far extreme in the other. Not socialist, but very much believing in free enterprise, but very, very much on the liberal with a small L wing. Indeed, his party was called the Liberal Party. Anyway, that left my father coming to England in 1933 with my grandmother. It's a story well known to you then what happened when war broke out and there was this existential threat to England, and how would the British react to it. An interesting little insight to this has come recently from a British journalist, a wonderful man called David Finkelstein. Some of you will know of him. He writes for the Times. And he discovered a marvellous exchange in the Foreign Office documentation between a Foreign Office official and the US Embassy in London. And it goes something like this. A junior Foreign Office official, worried about all these migrants and refugees coming to Britain, many of them Jewish, said, how do we know if they're really Jews? If they're really Jews, they're going to be anti-Nazi, but how can we tell? Could it be that the Nazis are taking passionate fellow fascists, teaching them some of the incantations or anything else, how to dress as a Jew, and shipping them over here? How do we know? The American said, I've never heard anything about this, but I will check back at home. Later came a telegram back from Washington saying, yes, we have heard similar stories, but obviously nobody knew if it was true or not. That became translated into, yes, the Germans are doing this, and hence that only added to the panic there was at the time. And so, like some people here, my father was arrested, and that was it. Off he went. This, incidentally, is the Constitution of Israel that my grandfather commissioned and helped write. And just reading it now, some of it looks as though it's going to be, whether it's going to survive under the present regime is pretty questionable. I said that when my father was at the camp, incidentally he was at London University, and they'd been evacuated to Cambridge, so he was still a student when he was arrested and brought here. But even before his arrest, he was under a serious threat. We have at home, to the shame of my country, and perhaps to the shame of many countries now when we talk about refugees, we have a letter, the original letter from the Home Office in London, addressed to my father, saying, you have no further right to remain here, and on I think it's the 14th of September 1939, we will be returning you to Germany. Had the war not broken out on the 9th of September, he wouldn't have been here. He might well have been in a camp of a very, very different sort in Germany. I think everybody here knows the story, how the British divided the refugees into A, B, or at least those of German or Italian descent into A, B, C. And C were pretty much the known Nazis and anti-Nazis. It's interesting that the British, though, once they'd been arrested, couldn't really tell them apart. And one of the documents we found was one just on ordinary notepaper, which they held on the train windows saying, we are not Nazis, we are victims of the Nazis. It didn't make much difference, as you know, for those of you who know about the history of what happened on the Danira itself. Can I take it everybody does know what happened on the Danira? I'm not going to go through all of that. One of the things that I love about this story is that they only, when they said collar the lot, they only collared the males. It didn't seem to occur to them at the time that maybe women could be saboteurs, maybe women could be spies, maybe women could be fifth columnists. And of course it didn't occur to them for a long time, and it was Melita Norwood who later on turned out to have passed the atomic secrets to the Russians, to the Soviets. It wasn't a bloke, it was a girl. And blow me down, it was Ethel Rosenberg who did the same from the American side. And again, some of the best spies in history have turned out to be women. But poor old British authorities, it absolutely hadn't occurred to them. So it was only the blokes that they sent here. Eventually, again, you'll probably know this story, the British government recognised it was a, quote, dreadful mistake, and they sent an officer, Julius Layton, here to try and sort it out. I discovered yesterday that my wife's uncle was the partner of Julius Layton in a firm in London. I had no idea of this. But my father's documentation shows how wonderfully pleased they were at Julian Layton's arrival. They have, if I can find some of this stuff, no, I won't show you that. Hang on, where is it? If I can find this stuff, I've got to think, yeah. So this was something that was put up, this is at Hay, not here in Tatura. Powerful interests are at work on your behalf. That was Lieutenant Colonel Thane from the Australians. And incidentally, my father's documents, and I'm sure documents you've got already show this, show how pleased they were at how the Australian military treated them compared to the British military on the Danira. Incidentally, we've got this as well. We do not want to write on notepaper printed for Nazis and fascists. And so much of what they were trying to persuade everybody about was that they weren't, even if they were Germans, they weren't fascists. Incidentally, there was obviously a great shortage of paper. Here you can see, and this is a recurrent theme, one message is put over another. This was an original camp message, and then there's another one, Monday, 10th of February, General Hut cleaning, is written over the top of it. This is the most wonderful thing. I mean, just look in this museum, some of the treasures here. When people have a huge amount of time at their disposal, what artistry, what extraordinary artwork they can come up with. And this was one, this is from my father's cousin, Elie Rosenblut, who made this absolutely exquisite three-dimensional, as it were, two-dimensional hut. I won't open it up because it's fragile, but it opens and opens and opens and opens and opens to reveal what was inside the hut. This is the quarters here at Camp 2 at Tatura. It's absolutely wonderful. We had another of these. This is given to my father on his birthday on the 4th of June 1941. Well, it must have been absolutely freezing here at the time, come to think of it. Hadn't occurred to me. So many of these wonderful documents we originally gave to the Imperial War Museum in London. We just didn't know what to do with them. Some we sold. I'm really sorry that 15 years ago we sold all those Reichmarks. We also found a whole bundle of Hay currency, now very, very valuable. I mean, we had no idea. And they're wonderful, wonderfully printed currency. And it even had my father's initials in tiny, tiny writing around the outside of it. And that wonderful thing, which you've seen the currency now, it says, we're here because we're here, because we're here, because we're here. Unfortunately, we got rid of that. We got rid of the whole bundle of stuff, the IWM. And just before we were coming, I found a whole bundle of new stuff, and I have no idea where it came from, and this is it. And Seamus has been so wonderful. We decided, well, come on, Seamus, we're going to give it to you, and you can work out what to do with it. Isn't it extraordinary how such a tiny episode about the Second World War has become such a significant issue of interest to so many academics? And I mean, there was a joke, there are almost as many academics interested as there were internees on the Dunera. Not quite so. But it is wonderful how much has emerged. I'm not sure whether Seamus is actually going to learn anything much from this or not. I don't know. One of the things, I mean, I'm not going to talk for a great deal, but one of the things I do want to talk about is when we discovered this stuff, where is some here, right, we also, oh, this is my father's diary. At the beginning, when I said paper was limited, they cut exercise books into 3, and each prisoner took a third, and this is my father's diary with very closely written stuff inside it. But we also discovered this book. Now, most of you will know this book, the Cyril Pearl book. This has my father's J.C. Ross. He anglicised his name when he joined the British Army from Rosenbluth to Ross. And the one bit that he's really put asterisks about is page 137 onwards. And this is about the court-martial. The 3 of the soldiers who had brutalised the internees on the Dunera were taken to a court-martial. And that court-martial, you don't need just to read this book, that court-martial was a disgrace. Firstly, the soldier who was the most hated by the internees, by Lieutenant O'Neill, was not even court-martialed. The lieutenant colonel who was in charge of the operation was basically got off scot-free, and unsurprisingly his name was Scott. And the only person who really was hammered was a junior soldier, as so often happens. Now, to me, this rings a bell because I discovered this after I was already interested in army maltreatment of prisoners. I started my journalistic career in Northern Ireland, and once I had covered the story of a woman who had saved, with unbelievable bravery, saved the life of a British soldier. He'd been shot, and she dragged him into her flat in what was called the Divis Towers, which is a very tall, very distinctive block of flats off the Falls Road in Belfast. And the IRA, the boys, were hammering at her door, demanding she hand over the soldier. And she, Catholic herself, stood against the door and said, if you shoot through the door, you'll shoot me. And she waited until the soldiers were coming up. She didn't have a telephone. Waited until the soldiers came, and then they took him away. And I interviewed her and thought, what astonishing bravery. And I sent her a Christmas card, and she wrote back to me and said, well, I wouldn't do it again. And I assumed that the boys had got to her, and I was really worried, so I went round to check on her when I got back to Belfast. It wasn't that. It was that her nephew had been picked up by British troops and badly beaten. And I followed up the story, and it was quite clear he had been badly beaten. And we had a medical report, thankfully not from a Catholic doctor, but from a Protestant doctor, which means a lot in Northern Ireland, and followed that story up. And I became intrigued about how a good regiment of soldiers would come into Belfast and find the natives were all mad. They're all throwing bricks and stones at them and not understanding that the previous regiment had really behaved very badly and had riled them. So you had this good and the bad, and the small groups of the bad really soured things for the groups of the good. And I realized quite early on in my journalistic career, as I looked more and more at army maltreatment, that this is a constant theme in every war, which is made worse by the fact that we all want to support our own side, particularly in war. And I find this is particularly interesting at the moment, searing at the moment, with what's going on in Gaza. Just last week you will have seen, or may have seen, video which shows ambulance crews, Palestinian ambulance crews, going in to reports of people being injured, and then it finishes in gunfire and all of them are killed. On video, their own video, which was found buried with them. And the Israelis denied this happened, absolutely denied it happened. Never believe an army. Specifically never believe an army if it's your army, because you want to believe them. The fact is troops often behave very, very badly. Do you remember the Al Ghraib camp in Iraq? This was Saddam's torture place. The good guys took it over. And then it turns out the good guys are torturing prisoners too. Some of you who are academics will know there's a good deal of academic literature on this, and people have replicated this among ordinary students. You get prisoners. So in one way, it's an extraordinary testament to the Australians and the way that they treated the prisoners here in Tatura. Because so far as I know, there have been no complaints ever about how they were treated here. One likes to think that that's the norm, but sadly, I don't think it is. Anyway, it's been a remarkable journey for Sarah and me. Many of you will have, I think we've got quite a few other descendants of De Niro boys, and of course from the Queen Mary. As I say, my father would have been rather impressed at you coming across second class in a liner. But he did keep, and I'm just going to finish on this, he did almost go back as you did when you came from Singapore. He kept the menus of the ship on the way back, because he went back and they went to a dining room and they had menus offered to them and they could have beer, and it was such a contrast with his journey out here. Incidentally, he finished the war having started as a prisoner of the British in the hold of a ship, the Donera, coming here. He finished the war as a captain and eventually a major in charge of Japanese prisoners of war in a ship coming away from Malaya. I mean, how crazy is war? Anyway, thank you all very, very much indeed. Thank you.